And welcome everyone to day 3 of Adobe DITA World 2016. My name is Stefan Gens. I'm the Adobe Worldwide TechComm evangelist, and my co-host is Dustin Vaughan. And we have a guest here today from Acrolinx. It's Andrew Bredenkamp, and he will talk about creating amazing content.
Thank you, Stefan, for the kind words, for the intro. Yes, I would like to talk a bit about creating amazing content. Obviously, in the context that we have today for this audience, for this show, I wanted to also pick up on a few themes that I think Joanne and Noz have been talking about in the first couple of keynotes. So I think there'll be a bit of continuity here, but hopefully from a slightly new perspective as well. So before I start that, I perhaps introduce a little bit myself and Acrolinx. I founded Acrolinx back in 2002. We work with some of the biggest brands in the world, most of the biggest brands in the world, I think, to help them create amazing content. All of the big technology brands in the world, and probably I would say about 40 to 50% of our customers are using DITA in some shape or form. Most of them, in fact, are using that, and a large proportion of them are using a combination of Adobe products in getting their job done. So I'll talk more about the little combinations in a minute. But just to give you a feeling we started out with SAP as our first customer. Got a lot of tech, a lot of healthcare, engineering, high tech, and increasingly also financial services, banks, and insurance companies are increasingly working on content, especially structured content approaches to solving their content problems, or especially dealing with solving their content problems at scale. So before I start talking too much about the product, I want to talk a little bit about how this fits into a larger context. And I know we've heard a lot in previous days about Joanne was talking about marketing and support being connected up, and I know that Noz was talking about his often takes this stand on technical communication is really part of marketing. I wanted to put it from a little bit of a different angle and think of it in the way that many of our customers right now are thinking of it, which is around the customer experience, and really taking that seriously and thinking on how to deliver a great customer experience. The overall customer experience is seen as something that's critical to growth and is a real differentiation especially for B2B companies. Very few companies are claiming themselves that they're excelling at this. There are a lot of people struggling with delivering a connected customer experience. And as I say, I think this is partly to do with the infrastructure that allows you to share content across silos properly, which is why it's relevant. This part of this whole structured content initiatives that that Adobe is solving are working in that direction. And the benefits are enormous. I mean, the companies that are doing this well are enjoying significantly higher than average revenue growth. So the companies that are doing well with the customer experience are doing well as a business. Now, customer experience is a big word. It's actually lots of people use it to mean many different things, and I'll mention some of those in a second. But ultimately, in almost every way that they use the phrase customer experience, it's powered by one thing, and that one thing is content. And increasingly, if you're trying to scale a customer experience, deliver a high quality customer experience, make the customers happy, make them interested, make them become advocates of your technology or your product, then you will use content to do that at scale. You can't just have more people throw more people at the problem. You need to excel at content. And so that's really the issue of how do you excel at this with your content. When you look at the issue of how to create content, although most of the marketing spend goes on content creation, and this is the same, we've heard the same kinds of numbers for the creation of technical product content as well. 50% goes on actual content creation, but that's the thing that is least planned. It somehow just happens. We have people who write and they write. But when we say very few, what Serious Decisions found is that fewer than 15% of their companies have a strategy around content creation. So think of that in terms of a customer journey or an experience from end to end, and you look at these kinds of models that people develop. These are kind of in an ideal world. This is what the model might look like. More modern ones view this as typically as kind of circles. The circles are the process of winning a customer, starting from at the top left there at 11 o'clock with awareness, and then moving through interest into evaluation. And then once the customer becomes, once the prospect becomes a customer, you move into this green circle where you're moving from onto usage or deployment or whatever the situation is, and then into engagement through customer support and customer success, as it's increasingly called, and then on to advocacy, and then coming back around to purchase. So these beautiful circles, they look great in PowerPoint, and they what you do here is then you map on the pieces of content that I need to feed the person at that particular point, so they move along the circle, preferably in a generally clockwise direction. So people are already mapping out these journeys of the customer experience, and they're mapping out maybe different ones where they want to make sure that everyone has the content that they need when they need it. If you think of this in terms of a more concrete example, this is the kind of thing example of a company really excelling at this. So here is a customer journey. I don't know if any or all of you have seen this Jean-Claude Van Damme video where he does the splits between two Volvo trucks. I presented this customer journey slide recently, and I asked the room, does anyone know which truck manufacturer this is? And of course, none of them did. Seriously, none of the people in the room knew which truck manufacturer this was. So what's happened here is it's done a great, everyone remembers the video, everyone remembers that it's Jean-Claude Van Damme, but no one can remember what truck that is. Now, this is great for building awareness, but what Volvo did really well in this particular case is they followed it up. For those people who were really their target audience, you'll see the bottom blue box is picking out the target audience. They developed follow-up videos where they said we were going to have specialist videos where we have the product manager for these trucks explaining why they're so cool, why they're so easy to park, and why this reversing feature that allows you to do the splits between them when they back down an airfield, how that actually makes it really easier if you're a driver or a fleet manager, that this truck is something special. So what they're doing is defining a different piece of content for a different target audience. And what then happens, of course, is as the interest gets deeper and turns into evaluation, they wanted to take that interest and feed that on into product data sheets, brochures, technical product content. Now, we're still technically kind of in marketing here, although many people would regard product data sheets as the kind of the borderline. But you can see at the bottom, again, I'm looking at different audiences for these different pieces of content. Now, before I buy, I'm typically going to have to submit some sort of pricing and ROI information. I'm talking then to a different audience. I'm pressing different buttons as I try to get my story straight. And I'm really highlighting different features, typically the ROI and the benefits, and and how safe this purchase is from a business point of view. And then, of course, I move on to onboarding, training, drivers literature. Again, back to my fleet managers and my drivers as an audience, but again, a different piece of content, a different type of content, a whole different function. Here, we're not trying to persuade anymore. We're not trying to persuade as we were in the brochures. We're trying to inform like we did in the product data sheets, but we're in transactional mode. We're in instructional mode. So I'm trying to create a different piece. I'm in altogether different mode. I have a different audience. And of course, as with many technical products that I'm sure many of you work with, you need to have maintenance and service information. These are long life products that have all that content that needs to go with them as well. Now, if you look at this picture, you'll also want to say, as a Volvo company, that you want to make sure that the brand goes right across all of these customer experience touch points, all of the places where the customer sees anything from you. It should, as we say, speak with one voice. And of course, the problem is that there are usually organizational silos between these different organizations. There are different people creating different pieces of content. And not only that, but they are typically created by different teams with different technical infrastructures. And so the question is, how do you share sensibly and with the minimum friction? How do you share content between these so that you can really have consistency in the customer experience across those silos? Because the customer doesn't know your silos and doesn't really care about your silos. So this I think is a best case of what this kind of joined up thinking can mean. And what you've got here then is on brand. It's the brand overlaying that. On target, that's the blue box at the bottom highlighting the audience. And all the different pieces of content created at different points in the process or by different teams, but flowing into one experience. And if you like, orchestrated in terms of the tone of voice, the technical features of that content are all orchestrated centrally and coordinated together. So that's kind of the vision, and you'll see this coming up all over the place. This is something from Mercedes, Mercedes-Benz, that came from the Adobe Summit in London. They gave a presentation on their view of the customer experience and how it helped them really turn around the Mercedes-Benz car business. This is an example from the investment sector where Gartner is drawing up what does a customer journey look like in the investment sector. These are the typical kinds of models that people are building. So this is just to show you that this is happening everywhere. We see this in every industry and in many different parts of the business, people looking at what a customer journey looks like and trying to work out how to join up all the content experience or the content-driven customer experience that they're putting in front of the customer. So we like these lovely drawings, but in fact, the customer experience in the modern internet age really more often looks like this. So this is again from Erin Provey, who's done some really interesting stuff on this. But she talked about it's just lots of people have talked about this chaos that if you actually look at the way people interact with your content, and increasingly people are trying to work in a data-driven way. They're looking at the data to understand who's reading our content where, and this is where, as many people have noticed now, that they're noticing that the technical product content, the stuff created by tech docs departments or tech pubs departments, is increasingly being read very carefully by people before they buy. So it's this concept of this joined-up thinking is really at the center of people's thinking. But you can think of this chaotic journey as people wander about, because frankly, much as you might love what you do and I love what I do, people don't care about us very much. They care about themselves. So they're getting on with their own lives and they're bumping into us occasionally. And they have little pieces of content that they bump into. There might be a newsletter, or it might be a a new, a product update release, or it might be some piece of content that I want to put in front of them that will, where I'm interacting with them. It might be an upgrade to something, or it might be I'm buying a new version of the product and I'm interacting with the content again. Each of those little steps is one of these blue dots that is helping guide the process or helping influence the process, rather than it being on this wonderful straight line or circular, beautiful circular path that we draw in our slides and on our whiteboards. So this again highlights how important it is for every piece of content to be able to do its job, and for it to work together. The Gartner have talked a lot about the importance of, or how much more valuable consistency is over one piece of quality. 100 pieces of consistency are so much more valuable and consistently rated more highly by customers. So consistent customer experience is what we're trying to do here. So given that everybody needs to care about the customer experience, what challenges does that present to us? We've already said there is no real pre-sales and post-sales anymore. In terms, looking at it from a customer perspective, and if you look at the data, if you look at what people will read, there is really no data to suggest that this old-fashioned pre-sales and post-sales distinction makes any sense anymore. On top of that, when you see that the internet has happened and everyone's they're downloading all sorts of content before they buy. Similarly, once they're a customer, they're consuming their marketing content. They continue to consume the marketing content. Then the other issue is, of course, that most businesses are now moving to a recurring model. You can now, not just software, where this kind of this process developed, and obviously now you can, for many years you've been able to buy your telephones through subscription or handsets or whatever, but you can now buy almost anything on subscription. You can subscribe to razors, you can subscribe to car tires, you can just subscribe to practically anything as a service. Recurring business is the model for everybody, and that means there is no pre-sales and post-sales. There is no post-sales, right? Everything is pre-sales. And so that connection, I think, has really revolutionized the way we think about content and the role that any single piece of content needs to play in the process. So thinking about this in terms of putting the customer in the middle, this is if you forget about the way your organization is organized and think about from the customer's perspective, then you naturally start to think about breaking down these silos. But that's really easier said than done. And I think that's where this starts to get interesting, because we look at a lot of people saying we want to have a joined up customer experience, and I'm wondering why there's only one department in the conversation, in the meeting, right? And so this customer focus makes, of course, publishing harder. It makes it harder because everyone's thinking about their target audience. I showed the picture with Volvo where we had the 5 or 6 different target audiences that you may have across your content. You'll know, as technical communicators, you'll know that if you take your audience seriously, you're thinking constantly about, does my audience know what this word means, or do I need to explain it? And what can I assume that they know? What's the best terminology for me to choose in order to communicate the technical stuff that I need to communicate successfully? So that customer focus makes publishing harder, because as you think about different levels of your content, different audiences for your content, you're going to want to think about different profiles for publishing. So it makes it harder in general to do this well. And people don't just want more personalization, more formats, more channels that they can publish to, but they also want engagement as well. Everyone's looking for content to be not just functionally successful, as in it does the job, it tells the person how to do what they need to do, but it needs to be on brand, and preferably it needs to actually drive that relationship, to drive that engagement. So Most of our customers are now moving their tone of voice. They're changing to a more conversational style. Lots of them are moving towards delivering some of their content via bots, where AI conversational agents will deliver some of the content. Some of the first line simple FAQs are now being moved to that. That conversational tone then becomes part of the company's brand, the company's personality. And so everyone is looking to move to a more conversational style, even in their technical product content. And Microsoft's done a really good job of making this transition over the years. They also did a lot of surveys as they went along to show to everybody, to measure and make sure that as they moved to this more informal style, this more conversational tone that they were taking, that their audience actually preferred it. And they found regularly, even for very technical content, that people liked it when you lightened up a little bit and spoke with a more human, more kind of conversational style. So people are not just looking for more personalization in terms of content delivered for their particular needs that's relevant to them, but they're also looking for it on the devices that they need and all those things. And on top of that, they want it to be this conversational, engaging kind of style. So things just got a lot harder. Obviously, it's clear, I think, to everyone who's using DITA, who's invested in the effort of getting DITA working for them. Although it's so much easier, it's become so much easier over the last years. But as you work through the process of DITA, I think it's clear to everybody how the benefits of being able to reuse content, repurpose content for different scenarios, creating different profiles and different personalities. But it's also worth thinking about how you can use those as containers to deliver really engaging content. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how Acrolinx can help deliver on that vision of DITA being a technology that can help deliver on those promises of highly personalizable, highly reusable, very flexible content in real scenarios. So we like to think in threes at Acrolinx. So I'm going to break down what we do into three main buckets. First of all, we like to talk about goals, setting your goals and publishing them, in effect, documenting your goals. The second part is guidance, where we're going to show how it's no good just setting the goals. You need to also help the team as they're creating the content to get closer to those goals. And the third part is governance, where the team as a whole can look at their content, all of their existing content in whatever buckets make sense to them, and get a quick overview of where are we with our content, where are the pieces where I need still to invest time and effort, how close are we to being able to go live with this particular set of content, whether it's a product release or a campaign or whatever. You're likely to have several different pieces of content that you're trying to develop. Being able to look at all of your content in one go is extremely valuable. So I'll show you those individual pieces quickly. The first piece, as I said, is about setting your goals for terminology, for style, for tone of voice. As I mentioned, very important to bring in things like the branding. We can help you support the findability aspects of your content. What keywords do you want to be optimized for? We can help, obviously, with the technical precision. We can help with any compliance issues that are focused around, we can use these words, we can't use these words for whatever reason. So all of those aspects rolled into a central place where you can manage this and collaborate with your own department, but also with other departments on this. And secondly, we have this new guidance wizard, which will look at the content that you've run through the platform, and will give you feedback on what maybe should be optimized or not. So if you're getting a lot of flags around a particular kind of issue, then this will give you the chance to look at it and be able to perhaps turn a guideline off or on, but possibly also, especially in a DITA context, and I'll come to that in a second, you may want to turn a rule off in a particular context or to activate a rule in a particular context. And that's where the interplay, especially between Acrolinx and DITA, really starts to get interesting. So one of the things we can do, for example, is to make specific rules or guidelines around specific DITA contexts. So if you're thinking about, you maybe have rules. We have lots of customers who have specific rules around their titles. If you look in a specific DITA context definition here, you can see we have here what kind of rules might you want to apply in short descriptions or steps or the prerequisites for a particular procedure in some procedural content, for example. Or what might you want to set for titles or specific types of titles in title for a concept or a task or whatever. So being able to have specific rules. One example of this is that that a lot of customers are using around the DITA guidelines are, for example, if you have steps in a process, that you make sure that each step starts with a verb. In other words, if I'm doing something, if I'm walking through a series of steps, every step needs to start with, replace the part or remove the part or whatever. It starts with a verb. And these actions are then very clear, and we can provide that kind of level of support on making sure that you're using the DITA the way it's supposed to be used. As a lot of DITA is a hugely powerful, flexible architecture, and of course that often takes some time for people to get used to. What do I use these particular elements for? How can I make sure that the team is using those consistently, that everyone's using it in the same way? And we can support those kinds of, we can support getting that kind of consistency in the way that you use DITA, so that the DITA can then be used more effectively the way it's supposed to be used. So, we can help, for example, with tagging up UI strings that aren't tagged properly, and a whole bunch of other very detailed use cases are built into our support for DITA in this kind of context. So what Acrolinx does is in setting up those goals as a team, as an organization, for all the different types of content that you have. And obviously you can set different guidelines for different types of content. If you have different types of DITA defined for different types of content, then we could have different rules for those different content types quite easily. Then we move on to guidance, and guidance here is really the where inside your whatever tools you're using to create content, we would provide a sidebar for the writer to get feedback directly and guidance on issues that we had found in the content. And this here is a kind of generic screenshot. I have here a very early stage. This is not that early stage, actually. It's basically finished, but I don't have a released version of it. But this is what it looks like in FrameMaker 12. This is coming out at being released at the end of this month with the sidebar. We had an existing integration, but we're moving it over to the sidebar architecture that we have everywhere else. This provides you with guidance right inside where you're editing. You'd have to go to a different application or whatever. It will check your content. It will give you a score to know whether your content is ready or not. As you can see, this is this very rudimentary content. It's not quite there yet. So we have integration with, this is with FrameMaker 12. We also have a really exciting new integration with the XML AEM connector, which is also newly released. And here you can see an example of the sidebar is on the other side in this architecture, but it's exactly the same sidebar with the same scoring mechanism and the same interaction model that you have in there. So again, you can be running DITA here, editing DITA and publishing out through AEM, and still get the Acrolinx guidance directly as you work on your content. So the scoring here is useful as part of the guidance, but the scoring also rolls up into what these scorecards that we create. And from those scorecards, you can generate then larger views of your, as I said, of all of your content, or all of the content that you're interested in today, or in this particular project or program or release or campaign or whatever it is, and pull all those scorecards out and track them over time, and track large quantities of your content all together. So this is an example of all of our blog pages over the years scored. You can see some of these are well below the score that we would hope to have. This one that's on 43 there in the middle is one that deals with a lot of terrible typos. If you look, it's actually in the URL, terrible typos. So the errors, so to speak, in there are planned to be there. But nevertheless, I can look at all of my blogs for the last 5 years and see how I'm doing in terms of content and make sure that I'm up there where I need to be. So to come back to these three things again, we like to think of this in terms of setting up your goals, in terms of brand, in terms of audience, in terms of content type, perhaps also compliance, findability, precision, all of those good things where you need to think about your language and think about the language you need to be successful. Then we provide guidance for all the content contributors, content writers, whoever's editing, writing, translating, whatever, wherever that is. And then the governance for the content teams to give you transparency and control over the entire the content-driven customer experience. So that's the three things we've done. I wanted to talk a little bit about the benefits of this because, you know, I know a lot of people understand intuitively this is a good thing, but quite often it's, especially as you think about engagement and how is this better? How does this actually make people happier? There hasn't been that much research on it. So I wanted to highlight a couple of examples. I have a few others, in fact, but I wanted to highlight a couple of examples of how this really works in practice. We've done some research. You can get this from our website, the Global Content Impact Index. It was an A/B test where we put two pieces of content in front of over 30,000 people and asked them just, how would you react to this content? Nothing was different in this content apart from the words. In other words, it was exactly the same story. It was about a cloud-based accounting package. You can get the full details and elsewhere. But the impact of that content was significantly different. So over twice the brand perception. How would you like, you know, do you like this company? Do you trust them? Over 3 times the conversion rates. Now, conversion rates means different things to lots of people. This might be customer satisfaction. Intel have done some interesting research on Acrolinx and improving content in a customer satisfaction context. So conversion rates can mean all sorts of things. In this particular context, it was, would you like to find out more? So moving the customer on through their journey. 3 times the conversion rates based on this different language, and twice the likelihood to purchase. So really dramatic difference just based on the word choice. Just to make this a little bit more concrete and relevant in the current context as we come up to election time in the US, just think about this example. So this is what they call nudge psychology. So there's this idea that by asking people questions, you can get them to think in a certain way and ultimately behave in a certain way. And so what they did is this study, they asked a bunch of people before the elections, before a few elections, how important is it for you to vote in the upcoming election? They asked a different set of people, how important is it to you to be a voter in the upcoming election? So the only difference here is between the use of a verb and the use of a noun, to vote or to be a voter. And it turns out that this has a very dramatic effect on people's thinking, whether they think of themselves as a voter or whether they think of themselves as someone who has a choice about whether they vote or not. It turns out that those people who are encouraged to think of themselves as a voter are more likely to vote. In other words, asking them this question in this different way with a noun rather than a verb has a dramatic effect on how they vote. What they did after the election, they used the official state records to look at, this is Stanford University, who ran this research. We looked at the official state records to determine whether the participants had voted or not, and saw really dramatic results. A dramatic difference in about 12 to 13 percentage points in turnout with those people who had identified themselves as being voters, as opposed to those people who thought they might vote. If you think of that in terms of benefit, they had increased turnout by 11% simply by changing the phrasing of the question. By putting a different question in front of someone, they had 11% more effect. Think of that in terms of the US presidential election, where they're going to be spending $4 billion on TV advertising. They expect to get an increase in turnout of only 10%. So if you think about this in terms of, am I going to advertise this, or am I going to make sure that my content is really working, is really engaging, is really doing the right thing that it's supposed to do, it should be relatively clear what's the best way to invest your resources. Findability is another issue. You know, as we've talked about, quality is really important for all sorts of other reasons, such as findability, right? We all know that every Google algorithm in the last 5 years has been focused on optimizing for quality, for delivering high quality, relevant content. And so it's an extra reason to be careful. There's no point in writing something if it's not findable. So I just wanted to pull those out a little bit. 5 big initiatives I think that companies are typically looking at to address with better content. So the first one is branding. Lots of companies have branding guidelines, style guidelines. They say that they have a style guide. They ask people to write to it, but how do they operationalize it? How do they really make it happen? So they're asking us to help with those things. They're asking us to help ensure compliance without having to constantly train and retrain the staff as branding happens, especially in the transition. As I mentioned, a lot of companies moving towards a more conversational tone. If you want a joined up customer experience, a joined up brand personality across all your content, that's really hard to do without a platform to support that initiative. So that's one thing we do. Customer experience I've talked about a lot, but I think improving conversion, improving engagement, customer satisfaction in a support context where you're not just focused on the facts, you're focused on how can you make sure that you're delivering the facts for that target audience in that particular moment that they find themselves in. We can ensure that content quality can be driven right across the business, get more done faster. We can help with the user experience. Increasingly, product content is being embedded in inside products, whether these are trucks or we have one customer with combine harvesters who deliver all of their content through a console inside the cab of the combine harvester. So it's not just like a manual or an old-fashioned paper or CD thing. It's really in the product, the experience. And so the user experience as they're interacting with the device and the content around the device is one thing. It's one experience. And so we have a lot of experience in working around clarity and the contextuality of what do I deliver when, and making sure that we can help companies do a good job there. We talked a lot about simplifying and humanizing this content as you get into more interactive modes of perhaps a speech-oriented interface. Maybe it's even a bot that you talk to. We've all, I'm sure by now, talked to Siri or Alexa or one of these generic ones, but lots of companies are building their own bots as well. And those bots are not terribly smart. All they're basically doing is they're an exciting new way of delivering your content. But the content needs to come from somewhere and needs to be created. And honing that and making sure that that's working well is a real challenge. And another thing that I think a lot of our customers are working on is moving towards, in all sorts of environments. This obviously started out in engineering, especially software engineering, and has spread out from there. But agile approaches, lean approaches towards getting more done faster. And very often we're faced with helping companies or asked to help companies have their content help their content keep up with agile or lean processes that obviously move very fast and constantly being released and all that good stuff. But there's a challenge with keeping the content up. So we have a lot of experience with those things. So, I'd like to think about this in terms of the human interaction as being at the key part of this and the role that technology can play in enhancing that that human interaction, rather than just thinking about technology as automating processes. Think about it as delivering a better human to human experience. One of the things I like most about DITA is the flexibility that it gives you. And to my previous point about agility, the ability to move very fast. And I think that's something that a lot of companies are now demanding from their entire team. And I think if you think of this in terms of evolution, Charles Darwin's probably appropriate to think about. It's not the strongest of a species that survive or the most intelligent, but it's the ones that are most responsive to change. And I think that's something that DITA empowers, and this joined up thinking around content certainly also can empower as well. So despite a couple of little interruptions there, I think we've just finished on time and should have maybe a chance to have a couple of questions if anyone has any.
I currently don't see any questions.
Okay.
Okay, no, seems there are no questions. Come on, folks. Okay, they're starting to type. Okay, Pierce is typing. And you finished precisely on time. Exactly 45 minutes, awesome. Let's give the people a few minutes to type their questions.
I can see Micah and Tosca is chatting in here around some of the DITA semantic rules as well that have come up. So.
Okay, it was just a thank you, Andrew. Great presentation.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, so what I found very interesting is that there's this integration from Acrolinx directly into AEM, the Adobe Experience Manager.
Yeah.
And that it's possible at first didn't really realize it, but we have to really understand that and think about it, how amazing that is really, that you have a web browser-based content management system with a full-fledged DITA editor in AEM and combined online in the browser with Acrolinx. So that's a pure cloud solution, and that's really, really cool. And when you take FrameMaker into the mix and integrate Acrolinx with FrameMaker with these new possibilities that you're adding there now, that's a really complete and round solution to improve your content quality. Really cool stuff.
Yeah, and I think, it was important to us to get this sidebar experience everywhere as we moved. Those of you that have been using Acrolinx for a while know that we had this old model where the flags were highlighted inside the document, and people got used to that, but I don't think they ever really fell in love with it. So this new sidebar has worked really well in a bunch of other contexts, and so we were very keen to bring that over to FrameMaker as quickly as possible. We now have it in FrameMaker, in AEM, and in the DITA connector to AEM. So really an end-to-end integration. We also have it, by the way, in InDesign and other Adobe technologies. So really, the idea is wherever you're creating that content, you can get the same guidance, the same support, and it really is the same guidance. So you're getting, you're not going to get different help or different feedback on your content from different technologies depending on where you're creating it. So that's really the vision that we have, is to be available everywhere, wherever content gets touched.
And I think it's really amazing that Acrolinx, or the technology behind Acrolinx, is so intelligent that it even understands the sentences and the words within the sentence, and then checks this with DITA ideas. And if this is really a term, or if this is this marked up as a UI element in DITA, stuff like that, that's also very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the interaction is really cool. I think one of the benefits of working in a structured environment is it's much easier to go down the path, as Micah and Tosca said in the chat there, around semantic elements. And IBM's done a lot of really cool work in, obviously they invented DITA, so they've been at the forefront of driving the discussions. We had lots of discussions with Mike and his colleagues around what kind of support we can give to getting the best out of DITA and actually having good governance over the use of DITA, because it can easily, if you have lots of different teams using it, they may have different opinions about how it should be used. And so providing that governance can really help make DITA also more effective, because it makes it more standardized across the different teams in the organization, and then you get more reuse out of your DITA. So these things are the combination really makes for a 1 + 1 is 3 kind of thing, that you get not only the two things good on their own, but together they're actually better than they would be separately otherwise. So it's a match made in heaven.
Wonderful. We already had match made in heaven yesterday in the presentation from Jan Grad about DITA 1.3 in FrameMaker.
Okay.
And he says it's a match made in heaven as well. Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Andrew.
You're welcome.
If there are no
Thank you for listening, everybody.
Yeah, there are no more questions. So thanks for everyone who was attending the keynote from Andrew Bredenkamp at Adobe DITA World 2016. As I said in the beginning, the session is recorded and will be published later in November on our YouTube channel. I've added the web links at the bottom of the I've added a YouTube link at the web links pot at the lower left corner of your screen. So there you will find the recordings of Adobe DITA World in a few weeks. Wonderful, thank you. I stop the recording now, and in a few minutes, in 8 minutes, we will continue with the next session with Charles Cooper from the Rockley Group about intelligent content meets intelligent metadata. Thanks and goodbye.